Get me coffee, black, strong. And don't take all day, Terrell. Brett Sullivan, white, polo shirt, stretched over a beer gut, designer watch glinting, didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. He just pointed at the break room like he was directing a dog. Preston Holloway, 6'2", black, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that cost more than Brett's monthly salary, stood in the marble lobby of Innovate-X headquarters. His headquarters, the $3 billion tech empire he built from a dorm room 14 years ago. But today, his name tag read, Terrell Jones, Intern. You hear me, Terrell? Or do I need to speak slower? Brett smirked, finally glancing up. Let me guess. Affirmative action hire? Diversity quota? You people always show up in suits you can't afford, trying to prove something. Preston's jaw tightened. He'd spent 17 days planning this undercover operation. He'd reviewed the turnover data, 43% in 12 months. He'd read the anonymous HR complaints about toxic management culture. He'd seen the Glassdoor reviews mentioning casual racism and good old boys club. But he didn't expect the rot to introduce itself in the first 60 seconds. Coffee's in the break room, intern. Brett turned away, dismissing him. And when you're done, there's a supply closet on level 2 that needs organizing. Might as well make yourself useful. Preston walked to the break room, made the coffee. Black. Strong. Brought it back. Brett took a sip, made a face. Tastes like shit. Do it again. And this time, don't forget, you work for me now. No, Preston thought, his hand clenching into a fist behind his back. You work for me. You just don't know it yet. But that was before the chair incident, before Brett dumped Preston's analysis in the trash during the team meeting and called it incomprehensible intern speak. Before Brett physically moved Preston's chair outside the conference room circle, announcing, "Interns observe. They don't participate." Before the entire staff watched in silence as Brett poured a cup of water over Preston's laptop, claiming it was an accident, then suggested Preston should probably head home early, since he clearly wasn't cut out for this environment. Preston stood there, soaked, humiliated, surrounded by 40 employees who wouldn't meet his eyes. His disguise was working perfectly. He was invisible, powerless. Just another black man being crushed by a system that didn't see him as human. This is what they experience every day, he realized. This is what the data couldn't show me. He walked to the elevator at 4:47 p.m., finger hovering over the button. He could end this. Walk to the executive floor. Blow his cover. Fire Brett Sullivan on the spot. But that wouldn't fix the system. That wouldn't reveal how deep the rot went. So Preston pressed 2 instead of 20, went back to the supply closet, sat on a cardboard box, and waited. But at 5:13 p.m., when the server alarm shrieked through every floor, when the company's entire cloud infrastructure went dark, when panicked executives couldn't reach the CEO for emergency authorization, everyone would learn that the man they'd been humiliating for 8 hours was the only person in the building who could save them, and the cost of that cup of coffee was about to be a career. Hours earlier, Monday, 6:47 a.m., Preston Holloway's private elevator opened directly into his penthouse office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Herman Miller desk. Awards lining the walls. He'd been CEO for 14 years. Built Innovate-X from $50,000 in seed funding to a $3 billion valuation. But the numbers on his screen told a story his success couldn't hide. Employee turnover, 43% in 12 months. Anonymous HR complaints, 127 in Q3 alone. Glassdoor rating, 2.8 stars, down from 4.6 2 years ago. Exit interview, keyword frequency, toxic, 89 times, management, 76 times, disrespect, 54 times. His phone buzzed. Marcus Chen, his COO, another senior engineer, quit. That's 6 this month. We're hemorrhaging talent, P. Whatever's happening in middle management, it's killing us. Preston stared at the data. He'd built this company on meritocracy, on innovation, on giving opportunities to people who looked like him when no one else would. But somewhere between the IPO and the Forbes cover, he'd lost touch with the ground floor. He couldn't fix what he couldn't see, and he couldn't see what he couldn't experience. Preston opened his laptop, created a new employee file. Name, Terrell Jones. Position, Business Operations Intern. Start date, Monday, 6/14. Reports to Brett Sullivan, Mid-Level Operations Manager. Brett Sullivan. The name had appeared in 4 separate HR complaints in the past 6 months. All dismissed due to insufficient evidence. All filed by black or brown employees who'd since left the company. Preston made one phone call to HR, using a voice modulator, to confirm Terrell Jones had been added to the system. Then he went home, took off the $4,000 suit, and laid out the outfit he'd wear tomorrow. Business casual. Off the rack. Target, not Nordstrom. A name tag that read, Terrell Jones, Intern. Monday, 8:52 a.m. Preston walked through the main lobby for the first time in 3 years. Usually he took the private entrance, private elevator, private everything. Now he stood in line at security like everyone else. The guard, Marcus, according to his badge, barely looked up. ID. Preston handed over the intern badge. Marcus scanned it. First day? Yes, sir. Good luck. You'll need it. Marcus's tone suggested he'd seen too many first days become last days. Preston stepped through security. The lobby was exactly as he'd designed it. Sleek, modern, inspiring. The company values etched into the marble wall. Innovation, integrity, inclusion. He'd commissioned that wall himself. But the employees walking past it looked defeated. Heads down. No one smiled. No one talked. This wasn't the company he'd built. You must be the new intern. Preston turned. Brett Sullivan, 5'10", receding hairline, polo shirt, smug smile. The man had been with InnovateX for 6 years. Started as a coordinator. Worked his way up to managing a team of 12. And according to the HR complaints, made life hell for anyone who didn't look like him. Terrell Jones. Preston extended his hand. Brett looked at it. Didn't shake. Yeah, I got the email. Honestly didn't think you'd actually show up. You diversity hires usually don't last past orientation. He laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. Break room's that way. Get me a coffee. Black. Strong. Don't take all day. Preston felt the rage rise in his chest. Hot, familiar, suppressed for decades. The same rage he'd felt at Stanford when a professor assumed he was there on a basketball scholarship. The same rage he'd felt when investors asked if he'd really coded the original platform himself. But he swallowed it, because this was the point. This was the data he needed. Preston walked to the break room, made the coffee, black, strong, brought it back to Brett's desk. Brett took a sip, made a face. Tastes like shit, he said, loud enough for the surrounding cubicles to hear. Do it again, and this time, maybe put some effort into it. You people always half-ass everything. You people. Preston made the coffee again and began counting the hours until 5:13 p.m. Preston Holloway learned to read spreadsheets the way other men read faces. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't have agendas. Numbers told you exactly what was broken if you knew how to listen. And right now, the numbers were screaming. He sat alone in his penthouse office at 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday, tie loosened, whiskey untouched, staring at the quarterly retention report. 43% turnover in 12 months. That wasn't attrition. That was hemorrhaging. InnovateX was bleeding talent faster than he could hire replacements. And every exit interview said the same thing in different words. Toxic culture, poor management, no respect. But the executive team saw none of it. His quarterly reviews showed strong performance metrics. Revenue was up. Productivity was up. Client satisfaction was up. So why were his people running for the exits? Preston pulled up the anonymous HR portal. 127 complaints filed in Q3 alone. He filtered by keyword. Toxic. Disrespect. Hostile. The words repeated like a drumbeat. He filtered by department. Operations. Brett Sullivan's name appeared in 4 separate complaints, all from employees who'd since resigned. All dismissed as unsubstantiated. Preston had built InnovateX from a Stanford dorm room with $50,000 and a refusal to accept that someone who looked like him couldn't compete in Silicon Valley. 14 years later, he had offices in 6 countries, 3,000 employees, and a company valuation that made venture capitalists salivate. But he'd also become the thing he'd sworn he'd never be. Disconnected. Isolated. The kind of CEO who made decisions from 30 floors up and never touched the ground. He'd stopped eating in the company cafeteria 5 years ago. Stopped attending team meetings 3 years ago. His calendar was managed by handlers who ensured he never spent more than 15 minutes with anyone below director level. He knew the names of his executives. He had no idea who cleaned his office at night. And somewhere in that distance, something had rotted. Preston closed his laptop, walked to the window, looked down at the city lights. You couldn't fix what you couldn't see, and you couldn't see what you refused to experience. He'd spent 2 decades building systems, trusting data, relying on reports filtered through 6 layers of management. But data couldn't capture the weight of a microaggression. Reports couldn't document the 1,000 small humiliations that made talented people quit. He needed to see it himself, not as Preston Holloway, feared CEO whose presence made directors sweat, as someone invisible, powerless. Someone the system could chew up and spit out without consequence. 2 weeks. That's all he needed. 2 weeks as an intern in operations, reporting directly to Brett Sullivan. 2 weeks to observe the machinery from the inside. To document what the spreadsheets couldn't quantify. Preston opened his laptop again. Created the employee file. Terrell Jones, business operations intern. Start date, tomorrow. He'd spent 14 years building a kingdom. Now he'd spend 2 weeks discovering what it felt like to be crushed by it. The disguise was simple. Different clothes, different posture, different speech patterns. He'd grown up in West Philadelphia before Stanford gave him a scholarship. He knew how to code switch, knew how to make himself smaller, less threatening, more forgettable. Tomorrow morning, Preston Holloway would disappear, and Terrell Jones would walk through the lobby doors into a company that no longer belonged to him. The cubicle smelled like old carpet and broken dreams. 4 gray walls, a desk with a wobbling leg, a computer from 2019 that took 6 minutes to boot up. Preston had approved a $2 million budget for office upgrades last quarter. Apparently, none of it made it to the intern pod. Brett dropped a cardboard box on the desk with enough force to rattle the monitor. Your workstation. I'd say make yourself at home, but let's be honest. You probably won't be here long enough to bother. Preston looked at the box. Pens, post-it notes, a stapler missing half its staples, the standard intern welcome kit that he'd personally designed to include a company hoodie, noise-canceling headphones, and a handwritten note from leadership. This box had none of that. First task. Brett pulled out his phone, didn't look up. Supply closet, level 2. It's a disaster. Sort everything alphabetically. Office supplies, cleaning materials, tech accessories, everything. Should take you most of the day. Preston kept his voice neutral. I thought I'd be shadowing the operations team. You'll learn what I tell you to learn, Terrell. Brett finally looked up, his smile sharp. Interns start at the bottom, we're at the bottom. You understand what I'm saying? Preston understood perfectly. This wasn't orientation. This was a test. Or more accurately, a punishment for existing. Yes, sir. Good. Closets down the hall, keys at the front desk. And Terrell? Brett's eyes moved deliberately from Preston's shoes to his suit jacket. That's a nice outfit. Real nice. What did that run you? 2 grand? 3? It was a gift? The lie came easily. A gift. Brett's smile widened. Right. From who? Your dealer? Or did you hit the outlet mall jackpot? He laughed, loud enough for the surrounding cubicles to hear. 2 employees glanced over, then quickly looked away. Preston's hands curled into fists under the desk. He'd paid $4,200 for this suit. Ermenegildo Zegna. Custom-tailored. He'd worn it deliberately, a test to see if competence and presentation could override bias. Apparently not. Supply closet, Terrell. Clocks ticking. Preston stood, walked to the front desk, got the key from a receptionist who barely acknowledged his existence. Found the supply closet on level 2, a windowless 10 by 10 room that looked like a tornado had mated with a filing cabinet. He stood in the doorway, staring at the chaos. Boxes stacked haphazardly, printer paper mixed with cleaning supplies, cables tangled with binders. This wasn't a day's work. This was 3 days of deliberate busy work designed to keep him isolated and invisible. Preston pulled out his phone, thought about calling his COO, thought about ending this experiment before it really began, but then he heard voices in the hallway. New interns already on closet duty. A woman's voice, amused. Brett's break-in ritual. Give it a week. Kid'll quit like all the others. A man's voice, resigned. He should quit. I've seen Brett make 3 interns cry this year alone. HR won't do anything. They never do. The voices faded. Preston put his phone away, rolled up his sleeves, and started sorting. Preston spent 4 hours in that supply closet, and in those 4 hours, he learned more about his company than 14 years of quarterly reports had taught him. The closet door stayed open. People came and went, and nobody noticed the intern organizing staplers. First came Maya Chen, junior analyst, grabbing printer paper with hands that shook. She was on the phone, voice tight. Mom, I know. I'm trying. Brett said my performance review was concerning, but he won't tell me what I did wrong. He just keeps saying I need to fit the culture better. A long pause. No, I can't just quit. I have loans. I have rent. She grabbed the paper and left, eyes red. Then came Marcus Webb, operations coordinator, who literally jumped when Brett's voice echoed from down the hall. Marcus grabbed a box of pens, glanced at Preston, then whispered, "Keep your head down. Don't give him ammunition. And whatever you do, don't be better than him at anything. Preston watched Marcus hurry away like a man fleeing a crime scene. At 2:15 p.m., two engineers stopped outside the closet, unaware Preston could hear them. "You submit your transfer request yet?" "Last week. Anything to get out of operations. I've got a master's degree from MIT, and Brett has me formatting PowerPoints like I'm a secretary." "At least he talks to you. He doesn't even acknowledge Keisha anymore. Just assigns her work through email like she's invisible." "She's filed 2 HR complaints. Both got dismissed." "Of course they did. Brett's boys with the VP. They go golfing every weekend." The engineers moved on. Preston's jaw tightened. He'd built InnovateX on a principle: merit over everything. Background didn't matter. Race didn't matter. Gender didn't matter. If you were brilliant and hungry, you had a seat at the table. But somewhere between the IPO and the satellite offices, that principle had been buried under layers of bureaucracy and boys' clubs and managers like Brett, who built kingdoms on making people feel small. Then, at 3:30 p.m., Preston saw something that reminded him why he'd started this company in the first place. Through the closet doorway, he watched Jennifer Okafor, senior operations lead, one of the few managers who'd survived the turnover, stop at Maya Chen's desk. Jennifer didn't rush, didn't hover, just pulled up a chair and sat. "Maya, talk to me. What's going on?" Maya's voice cracked. "I don't know what he wants. I do everything he asks. I stay late. I fix everyone's mistakes. But he keeps saying I'm not leadership material. I'm starting to think—" "Stop." Jennifer's voice was firm but kind. "You are brilliant. Your work is exceptional. The problem isn't you. The problem is a manager who sees talent as a threat instead of an asset." "But what do I—" "Document everything, every interaction, every assignment, every comment, and I'm personally going to review your performance file because I guarantee what he's telling you doesn't match what the data shows." Maya exhaled. "Thank you. That's what real leaders do. They build people up. They don't tear them down to feel powerful." Jennifer stood, squeezed Maya's shoulder, and walked away. Preston watched her go. Jennifer Okafor. He'd promoted her 8 months ago based on peer reviews and retention metrics in her previous team. She'd requested transfer to operations specifically to fix the culture issues. She was fighting the rot from the inside. But one good manager couldn't cure a systemic infection. And Brett Sullivan was the disease vector. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and fear. 12 people sat around the table, Brett at the head like a king presiding over anxious subjects. Preston, Terrell, was given a chair at the far corner, positioned just outside the natural circle of conversation. The meeting was about the Q4 operations rollout. Brett had a PowerPoint pulled up, 17 slides of information Preston had personally architected 3 months ago during an executive strategy session. Watching Brett present it as his own work was physically painful. "So as you can see," Brett clicked to slide 9, "the new inventory tracking system will reduce overhead by 12%. He said it with confidence. He said it wrong. Preston saw the error immediately. The 12% figure applied to warehouse operations specifically, not total overhead. Conflating the two numbers would create unrealistic budget expectations that would collapse by January. He should stay quiet. That was the smart play. Observe, document, stay invisible. But the analyst in him, the part that had built InnovateX by obsessing over details everyone else missed, couldn't let bad data stand unchallenged. Preston raised his hand. Brett didn't see it. Kept talking. "Excuse me." Preston's voice was quiet, but clear. The room went silent. Everyone turned. Brett's expression curdled. "Did the intern just interrupt me?" "I apologize, but there's an issue with slide 9. The 12% reduction applies specifically to warehouse overhead, not company-wide operations. If we present it as total overhead reduction, the finance team will budget incorrectly, and we'll have a significant shortfall in Q1. Preston watched the information land, watched Brett's face cycle through confusion, comprehension, then rage. Maya Chen nodded slowly. "He's right. I remember the original projection report specified warehouse-specific metrics." "The intern," Brett said slowly, "has been here for exactly 6 hours, and he thinks he understands our operations better than the leadership team. I'm just reading the data on the—" "You're reading nothing." Brett stood, walked around the table, stopped directly behind Preston's chair. "You know what this is? This is typical. You people always think you're smarter than everyone else. Show up with your fancy suits and your affirmative action credentials, and suddenly you're experts." Preston felt the room's energy shift. 11 people staring at their laptops, their notepads, anywhere but the conflict unfolding. "Stand up, Terrell." Preston didn't move. "I said, stand up." Preston stood. Brett grabbed the back of Preston's chair and dragged it. Actually, dragged it. Metal legs scraping against tile, 3 feet away from the table, positioning it against the wall like a child in timeout. Interns observe. They don't participate. They definitely don't interrupt their superiors with intern rambling about data they don't understand. Brett returned to his seat, adjusted his collar. "Now, where were we before the interruption?" Preston stood there for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Every eye in the room studied the table. No one spoke. No one moved. He could blow his cover right now. 3 words. "I'm Preston Holloway." And this meeting would explode. Brett would be escorted out by security within minutes. But that wouldn't fix what Preston had just witnessed. 11 employees watching a colleague be publicly humiliated, and not one of them saying a word. This wasn't about Brett. This was about a culture so broken that abuse had become normal. Expected. Acceptable. Preston walked to his exiled chair, sat against the wall, and took notes. Brett continued the presentation with the wrong data. No one corrected him. Preston finished the competitive analysis report at 4:47 p.m. Brett had assigned it at 3:15, a task normally given 2 days, compressed into 90 minutes as a setup for failure. Research 6 competitors. Analyze market positioning. Summarize strategic vulnerabilities. Do it before end of business. Preston had done competitive analysis before Brett Sullivan learned to spell PowerPoint. He'd finished in 70 minutes. The report was good. Better than good. It identified 3 market gaps InnovateX could exploit, 2 emerging threats from overseas competitors, and 1 strategic partnership opportunity that could unlock a new revenue stream. Preston saved it to the shared drive, emailed Brett the link, and leaned back in his chair. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "You're still there?" Most of Brett's targets quit by day 2. Maya Preston smiled slightly. Typed back. Still breathing. At 5:03 p.m., Brett's voice boomed across the office. "Jennifer, got a minute?" Preston watched through the cubicle gap as Brett approached Jennifer Okafor's desk, his face arranged in theatrical concern. "It's about the new intern, Terrell." Brett sighed like a disappointed father. "I gave him a competitive analysis assignment this afternoon. Simple stuff. He had 90 minutes. I just checked the shared drive. Nothing. No report, no email, no communication. Preston's blood went cold. He pulled up his sent folder. The email was there. Timestamp, 4:47 p.m. Recipient, Brett Sullivan. Subject, Competitive Analysis Report, completed. He opened the shared drive, navigated to the operations folder. The report was gone. I really tried with this kid, Brett continued, loud enough for the surrounding cubicles to hear. Gave him chances. Simple tasks. But he's not cut out for this environment. I think we need to reassign him somewhere he can't do damage. Maybe facilities coordination? Something solo, where he's not interacting with clients or handling sensitive data. Jennifer's voice was careful. Did you reach out to him? Ask what happened? I'm not going to babysit an intern who can't follow basic instructions. We're a billion-dollar operation, not a daycare. Preston stood, walked toward Jennifer's desk. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage so pure it felt like electricity in his veins. Excuse me. His voice cut through the office chatter. I completed that report at 4:47. Emailed it directly to you and saved it to the shared drive. Brett turned, eyebrows raised in performative surprise. Really? Because I'm looking at my inbox right now, and I see nothing from you. Check your spam folder. I don't need to check anything, Terrell. You didn't do the work. It's okay to admit when you're overwhelmed. Preston pulled out his phone, opened his sent folder, held it up so Jennifer could see the timestamp, the recipient, the subject line. Jennifer's expression shifted. Brett, he's showing me Photoshop. Brett waved dismissively. These kids can fake anything these days. Look, Jennifer, I know you want to be supportive, but we can't lower our standards just to make people feel included. That word, included, like Preston was a charity case, like his presence was a favor, not a right earned by competence. Preston's finger hovered over his phone. One call to his COO. One sentence, it's Preston. Conference room now, and this would end. He could feel the truth pressing against his teeth like a caged animal. I built this company. I sign your paychecks. I could end your career with a phone call. But 15 employees were watching, waiting to see if the system would protect them or crush them. If Preston broke cover now, he'd win the battle. Brett would be gone by morning. But the war would continue. Because men like Brett thrived in shadows, and Preston had just seen exactly how deep those shadows went. The alarm started as a low hum, then escalated to a shriek that cut through every floor of InnovateX headquarters. Red emergency lights strobed in the hallway. Preston knew that sound intimately. He'd programmed it himself 3 years ago during the security infrastructure overhaul. Critical server failure. Level 5 alert. Every computer screen in the office flashed the same message. System offline. Contact it immediately. Brett's face went white. What the hell is that? People were standing now, phones out, panic rippling through the department like a shockwave. The server housed everything: client data, active contracts, real-time operations for 17 distribution centers across North America. If it stayed down for more than 30 minutes, InnovateX would breach service-level agreements with clients worth $340 million in annual revenue. Jennifer was already on her phone. It says the main server cluster crashed. They're trying to reboot, but something's blocking the restart sequence. They need executive authorization to access the backup protocols. How long? Brett's voice cracked. They don't know. Could be minutes. Could be hours. Hours? Brett spun toward his team, eyes wild. Who was running diagnostics today? Who touched the server? Marcus Webb raised his hand tentatively. I ran a standard maintenance check this morning. Same one we run every Monday. It was clean. Well, obviously it wasn't clean, Marcus, Brett was shouting now, sweat beading on his forehead. You crashed $1 billion system because you couldn't follow basic protocols. Brett, I followed the exactum. Get it back on the phone, now. Brett turned to Jennifer. We need to contact the executive team. This is going to the board. Heads are going to roll. Preston stood against the wall, watching the chaos unfold. He knew exactly what had happened, because he'd designed the fail-safe system personally. Someone had attempted unauthorized access to the financial database, likely a phishing attack that hit an employee's email. The server had automatically isolated itself to prevent data breach, but the restart required dual-factor authentication from C-suite credentials. They needed the CEO. They needed Preston Holloway. But Preston Holloway was supposed to be unreachable, on a private retreat with no phone access, according to the cover story his assistant had distributed. Jennifer hung up and turned to Brett. It can't restart without executive authorization. They've tried reaching the COO. He's in Singapore. The CFO is in surgery. They're trying to get the CEO, but what? He's off-grid, some kind of meditation retreat, no phone. They're sending a courier to his last known location, but that's a 3-hour drive minimum. Brett grabbed his desk, knuckles white. 3 hours? We'll have lost every major client by then. Do you understand what this means? This is my department. My responsibility. They'll blame me for this. For once, Brett was right. Preston watched him spiral, watched the casual cruelty evaporate into raw fear. This was a man who'd spent years building a kingdom on the backs of people he terrorized, and now that kingdom was burning. Maya's voice cut through the noise. Can't anyone else authorize the restart? VP of Operations? Anyone with executive credentials? Already tried, Jennifer said. The system requires CEO-level authentication. It's a security measure for this exact scenario. Brett turned to her, desperate. Then break into the system. Override it. Hack it. Whatever it takes. That's not how it works, Brett. The encryption is... The conference room doors burst open. 2 men in suits, VP of Operations and Chief Technology Officer, both looking like they'd just run up 6 flights of stairs. The VP's voice was ice. We have 30 minutes before we breach the Hartwell Industries contract. That's $180 million annual. Someone get Preston Holloway on a phone right now, or I'm authorizing a full system override. You can't override CEO authentication, the CTO said. It's hard-coded. We'd have to rebuild the entire... Then rebuild it. Preston felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He already knew what it was. Emergency protocol. His COO's trying every backup number, every possible contact. The system needed its creator. And its creator was standing 10 feet away, wearing a name tag that said Terrell Jones. The VP of Operations had his phone pressed against his ear, pacing like a caged animal. I don't care if he's on a mountaintop in Tibet. Find him. We're bleeding clients by the... He stopped, listened. His face went from red to gray. What do you mean the courier can't reach him for another 2 hours? The CTO was at a laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard, sweat dripping onto the keys. I can't bypass the authentication. It's biometric and encrypted. We need his thumbprint or retinal scan or... We need him on video, Jennifer said quietly. Everyone turned. The system accepts video authentication for remote authorization. I've seen it used during the Tokyo expansion. The VP stopped pacing. Can we do that? If we can get him on a secure video call, yes, but he'd need to be somewhere with internet access and conference room, now. Everyone. The VP was already moving. Get our best IT people in there. Get the authentication protocols loaded. And someone find me a direct line to Preston Holloway's assistant, his lawyer, his mother. I don't care. Someone who knows where he actually is. 20 people flooded into the main conference room. The massive screen on the wall, 80 inches of 4K display that Preston had installed for board presentations, flickered to life. Brett pushed his way to the front, trying to assert authority he didn't have. Preston stayed in the back, heart hammering. This was it. The moment where his careful cover would either hold or explode. The CTO pulled up the emergency authentication portal, a spinning wheel, waiting for connection. "I've got his executive assistant on the line," someone shouted. "She says she's been trying to reach him for 20 minutes. He's supposed to be at a private wellness center in Napa, but they say he checked out early this morning. She has no idea where he is." The VP's hands were shaking now. "Try his personal cell, try everything." Maya was staring at the screen, then at her phone, then back at the screen. "Wait, the system log shows the last CEO authentication was at 6:52 this morning. If he checked out this morning, maybe he's already on his way back? Then why isn't he answering?" Brett's voice was shrill. "What kind of CEO disappears during a crisis?" The kind conducting an undercover investigation, Preston thought. The kind who disabled his executive phone to maintain his cover. The kind who was currently standing 15 feet away, watching his company burn. The screen suddenly changed. Connection established. The spinning wheel stopped. And then a video feed appeared. Preston Holloway's face filled the 80-inch screen. Professional backdrop. Crisp white shirt. The CEO everyone knew but few had met in person. Except the CEO wasn't in Napa, wasn't on a wellness retreat, wasn't anywhere remote. The timestamp in the corner showed Live Feed, Innovitex HQ, Floor 2. Preston had set up the video relay 30 minutes ago, routed through his laptop in the supply closet, triggered remotely by his phone. The camera was pointed at the chair where he'd been sitting during the humiliation meeting. But he wasn't in the chair anymore. He was standing in the back of the conference room, wearing an intern badge. The video Preston spoke, his voice filling the room through the surround sound speakers. "This is CEO Preston Holloway. I'm authorizing emergency server restart. Authentication code, Sierra 7 Alpha 9 Tango X-ray. Biometric scan incoming." He raised his phone. The screen flashed. The authentication portal on the wall went green. Restart authorized. The alarm stopped. The red lights faded. Computer screens across the building blinked back to life. Crisis averted. The room erupted in relieved chaos. The VP collapsed into a chair. The CTO was already on his phone coordinating with IT, but Maya was staring at the video feed, then at the timestamp, then at the back of the room, where Preston stood, hand still holding his phone, the same phone that had just transmitted the biometric data. Her eyes went wide. Preston met her gaze. Put one finger to his lips. Then he reached up and slowly removed his intern badge. The video feed on the screen flickered. Preston Holloway, the CEO, the face everyone recognized from Forbes and TechCrunch, stood from his chair in the video, walked toward the camera, and reached forward. The feed cut to black. Confused murmurs rippled through the conference room. The VP was already dialing. "We need to keep him on the line for damage assessment. You don't need to call him." Every head turned. Preston stepped forward from the back of the room, rolled up his sleeves. The same sleeves that had been soaked in supply closet dust. The same suit Brett had mocked as stolen or drug money. He held up his phone, showing the remote video interface still open. The feed was on a 30-second delay. Routed through the supply closet on floor 2. "I've been here the entire time." The silence was absolute. Maya's hand went to her mouth. Jennifer's eyes went wide with understanding. The CTO looked at Preston, then at his intern badge on the floor, then back at Preston, his brain visibly trying to reconcile the impossible math. Brett's face cycled through confusion, recognition, then pure animal terror. "My name is Preston Holloway." His voice was quiet, but filled every inch of the room. "I'm the CEO of Innovate-X. I've been working in operations for the past 8 hours as an intern named Terrell Jones. And I've seen everything." The VP of Operations stood slowly, looking like he might vomit. "Sir, I had no idea." "I know you didn't. That was the point." Preston's eyes swept the room, landing on each person who'd witnessed the day's humiliations. "For 8 hours, I've experienced what it's like to work at the company I built. The company I thought valued merit and respect and human dignity." He turned to Brett, who'd gone pale as a corpse. "Brett Sullivan, you ordered me to make you coffee twice. You mocked my clothes, implied I was a thief or a drug dealer, and suggested I was here because of affirmative action. You assigned me to a supply closet for 4 hours. You dragged my chair away from a meeting table in front of 12 colleagues and told me I wasn't qualified to participate." Brett's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You deleted my competitive analysis report from the shared drive. You accused me of fabricating evidence. You recommended I be reassigned to facilities coordination because I wasn't cut out for this environment." Preston's voice never rose, never wavered. "And when a crisis erupted that threatened this company's survival, your first instinct wasn't to solve it. It was to blame Marcus Webb for a failure he didn't cause." Preston stepped closer. Brett actually backed up. "But here's what you didn't know, Brett. That server failure? It was a phishing attack. The system isolated itself to protect client data, a protocol I personally designed. And the competitive analysis you deleted? I recovered it from the server backup 30 seconds ago. It's currently being emailed to Jennifer, the VP, and the board of directors." He pulled up his phone, turned the screen toward Brett. The report was there, time-stamped, complete with Brett's deletion metadata. "You didn't just humiliate an intern today, Brett. You sabotaged a member of your team, created a hostile work environment, and demonstrated exactly why Innovate-X has a 43% annual turnover rate." Brett's voice came out as a whisper. "Mr. Holloway, I didn't know—" "That's the problem," Preston cut him off. "You didn't know who I was, so you felt safe abusing me. Which means every person in this department who doesn't have power, who doesn't have protection, who doesn't look like you, they've experienced this same treatment. Or worse." He turned to the VP. "How many HR complaints has Brett Sullivan received in the past year?" The VP looked stricken. 4, sir. All dismissed as unsubstantiated. Pull the files. Every complaint. Every exit interview that mentioned his name. I want them on my desk in 1 hour." Preston's gaze returned to Brett. "You're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You'll receive severance as outlined in your contract, but if you ever use Innovate-X as a reference, I'll personally ensure every company in this industry knows exactly why you were fired." Brett's legs seemed to give out. He grabbed the conference table for support. Preston addressed the room. Everyone else stay. We need to talk about what happens next. Security arrived 3 minutes later. Two professionals in dark suits who'd escorted Preston to charity galas and board meetings. Now they flanked Brett Sullivan, who couldn't seem to make his legs work properly. "Wait!" Brett's voice cracked. "Please, I have a mortgage, kids in college. I've been here 6 years. You had 6 years to be a decent human being." Preston's tone held no anger now, just cold finality. "You chose cruelty instead. That's not a mistake, Brett. That's a pattern. And patterns have consequences." The security team guided Brett toward the door. He looked back once, searching for sympathy in the faces of his former colleagues. Found none. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a gavel. Preston turned to the remaining staff. 23 people, various levels of shock and fear radiating from their faces. They thought they were next. "I'm not here to fire you," he said quietly. "I'm here to apologize." Jennifer blinked. "Sir? I built this company on a promise. That talent mattered more than background. That respect wasn't negotiable. That people who came here would be valued for their contributions, not judged by their skin color or gender or accent." Preston's voice carried the weight of genuine regret. "And somewhere between the IPO and the Forbes covers, I lost sight of the ground floor. I stopped seeing the daily reality of what it meant to work here. That failure is mine." Maya spoke up, her voice tentative. "You went undercover to see it for yourself." "I did, because data can't capture humiliation. Exit interviews can't document the 1,000 small cruelties that make talented people quit." He looked at Marcus, who still looked terrified. "Marcus, your maintenance check was perfect. The server failure was a phishing attack, not your fault. I'm sorry you were blamed for something you didn't cause." Marcus exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. Preston continued. "Starting tomorrow, we're implementing immediate changes. Independent HR audit of every complaint filed in the past 2 years. Mandatory bias training for all managers conducted by external experts, not corporate consultants reading scripts. Anonymous feedback system that reports directly to my office, bypassing middle management entirely. And I'll be spending 1 week per quarter working in different departments. No disguise, no performance, just listening." He paused, meeting each person's eyes. "I can't undo what happened today, but I can make sure it never happens again. And I can promise you this: if you see toxicity, if you experience discrimination, if someone makes you feel less than human for doing your job, you report it, and I will personally ensure there are consequences." The VP cleared his throat. "Scripture, with respect, one termination won't fix the culture. You're right, which is why you're going to help me identify every manager who operates like Brett. Every system that enables abuse. Every policy that protects bullies instead of employees." Preston's eyes hardened. "We're going to burn the rot out of this company. All of it." 3 hours later, Preston sat alone in his penthouse office. The city lights sparkled below. His desk held 4 folders: HR complaints, exit interviews, performance reviews, and the competitive analysis he'd written as Terrell Jones. His phone buzzed. Text from Maya. "Thank you for seeing us, for real." Then Jennifer. "Leadership isn't about being feared. Today you showed us what it actually means." Then Marcus. "I was going to quit tomorrow. Now I'm staying." Preston stared at the messages. 8 hours ago, he'd walked through that lobby invisible and powerless. Now he understood what his spreadsheets could never show him. that a company's soul wasn't measured in revenue or market cap. It was measured in whether people felt safe enough to stay. He opened his laptop, started typing the company-wide memo that would go out at 8 a.m. The title, "We Need to Talk About Who We've Become." For the first time in 14 years, Preston Holloway wasn't writing as a distant CEO. He was writing as someone who'd felt the system's weight, who'd been called "you people," who'd had his chair dragged away from the table. And he was writing to make sure no one at InnovateX would ever feel that way again.